Welcome to episode 10 of Couple of Lawyers, Arguments and Thought, where we dive into the legal issues shaping society today. This time, we're going to be taking a look at a pretty big Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage. Didn't actually legalize it, but it's definitely a step in a certain direction. And
a development for sure, yeah.
Yeah, a big development in the fight for LGBTQIA plus rights. So we're going to be kind of unpacking all of that today. And
sounds fascinating.
yeah, and what it could mean for the future.
Yeah, what it could mean going forward. So
Right.
where should we begin?
Well, I guess maybe we should start with,
I mean, what's really intriguing about this ruling is that
yeah.
the court basically said, it's not our call. It's up to Parliament to decide this,
Okay.
whether or not to legalize same-sex marriage.
So they're kind of passing the buck a little?
Well, yeah, I mean, it happened back in October of last year, 2023.
Right.
17th of October.
Yeah.
And, it's really sparking a lot of conversation about, the role of the judiciary versus the legislature, especially when it comes to these big social changes.
Yeah. No, for sure.
It's a really interesting question.
It's definitely nuanced. And, it's interesting because while the court didn't grant full marriage equality,
Right.
they did order this creation of a special committee.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's this committee's job to figure out what legal rights same-sex couples should have.
Interesting.
Things like property ownership, pensions,
Okay.
things like that.
Because outlining a path forward, maybe,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's a big deal.
it is a big deal because it's acknowledging,
It's acknowledging.
hey, there is discrimination.
Yeah.
It's like the highest court in the land saying,
Yeah.
okay, well, we might not be ready to tackle this whole marriage thing,
Right.
but
there are.
we need to address these inequalities.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you think this is like a stepping stone?
It's hard to say. I mean, it could be.
Get some of these basic rights in place.
Sure.
And then maybe that paves the way for full marriage equality down the road.
Possibly, but there's a catch.
Oh.
This committee doesn't have a deadline.
Oh.
There's no timeline.
Interesting.
No set timeline for when they need to come up with recommendations.
Okay.
And there's no guarantee that those recommendations will be implemented.
So it's really a wait and see.
It is. It's a lot of wait and see for these couples.
Yeah.
A lot of uncertainty.
So it's like progress, but then also
Yeah. I mean, it must be kind of a roller coaster of emotions for a lot of these couples.
I think to really understand this, though, we need to kind of rewind a bit
Okay.
and look at the history of LGBTQIA plus rights in India.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key to understanding where we are right now.
Yeah.
Because it's been a long and complicated journey. And I mean,
Right.
a major part of that story is Section 377.
Of the Indian Penal Code. This is a colonial-era law from 1861, criminalized same-sex relationships.
And that took until 2018.
So in 2018, yeah.
Wow.
To finally strike it down.
That's mind-boggling.
It is pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, it really speaks to how some of these prejudices
Yeah.
are so deeply ingrained and how long these things can take.
But there were some glimmers of hope along the way, right?
There were, yeah,
I
definitely.
remember a 2009 ruling
Mm-hmm.
where the Delhi High Court said, okay,
Yeah.
Section 377, unconstitutional, at least when it comes to consenting adults in private.
It was a step forward at the time.
It felt huge, I bet.
It felt huge.
Yeah.
But sadly, it was very short-lived. Just a few years later, 2013, Supreme Court reverses that decision and reinstates Section 377.
Oh my gosh, talk about a setback.
It was a huge blow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Must have been incredibly disheartening.
Yeah, absolutely. For so many people. But thankfully, the fight didn't end there.
Oh.
And in 2018, we see the landmark case. Supreme Court finally permanently strikes down Section 377.
What a victory.
Yeah, I mean, they said that consensual same-sex relationships were protected under the right to privacy,
Right.
equality, and dignity.
Okay, so
Big win.
how does that ruling then tie into
Okay, good question.
what's happening now with this new committee
Mm-hmm.
and the whole debate about marriage equality?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting because some legal experts argued that the 2018 ruling, along with another key case in 2017,
Okay.
Justice K.S. Puttaswamy v. Union of India, which actually established the right to privacy as a fundamental right.
Okay.
They argue that those two cases should
Yeah.
have been enough for the court to just go ahead and legalize same-sex marriage.
Really? So,
Yeah.
they're saying that
Right. Yeah.
with the right to privacy being a fundamental right,
Yeah.
that should have been enough.
Pretty much.
Okay. How does the right to privacy connect to marriage equality?
Well, the argument basically is that the right to privacy includes the freedom to make personal choices about your relationships
Okay.
without interference from the state.
Right.
And marriage being like a deeply personal and fundamental aspect of life should fall squarely under that umbrella.
Okay, so some people are saying that
Yeah.
the court already had the legal basis to do this, but chose not to.
That's right.
Why take this, like, cautious route?
Well, it comes down to this complex debate about something called judicial restraint. It's basically the idea that courts should be really careful not to overstep their boundaries. Intrude on areas that are the responsibility of elected officials.
Like Parliament.
Exactly like Parliament.
So it's a balancing act between the different branches of government.
Yeah, it is. It's a really delicate balance.
Yeah.
People who support judicial restraint would argue that major social changes and, like legalizing same-sex marriage,
Right.
that should be decided by the people's representatives.
Parliament.
Yeah, not unelected judges.
I mean, I get that, but it's also, like, frustrating.
Sure.
When you have this fundamental right at stake.
Yeah.
It's like, shouldn't the court step in and protect that right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's...
Especially when there's discrimination.
Yeah. That's the heart of the debate.
Yeah.
Critics of the ruling believe that
Okay.
the court missed an opportunity to uphold those rights, set a strong precedent for equality.
Right.
They're saying waiting for Parliament could take years if it happens at all.
Right.
And in the meantime, these couples are left vulnerable.
It's like stuck between respecting the legislative process.
Exactly.
But also, like, people need these rights.
Yeah, and they need them now.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a tough situation.
And it's interesting, too, because when we look globally, a lot of countries, marriage equality was achieved through court rulings.
Yeah, right.
Like using right to privacy, equality as key factors.
Exactly.
Like in the U.S., for example.
Yeah, 2015, the Supreme Court there legalized same-sex marriage.
Yeah, big landmark case.
Huge. Yeah, and there have been others since then, too.
Oh, really?
Like last year, Greece became the first Orthodox majority country to legalize same-sex marriage.
Wow.
And Estonia, the first former Soviet country to do so.
So it really does feel like this global wave of progress.
It does feel like the world is moving in a certain direction.
Yeah, so why is India taking this more cautious approach?
Well, I think you have to keep in mind that India's got this very unique cultural and political landscape.
For sure.
Traditional values play a much bigger role there than in some other countries. And there's also this strong resistance to change from some segments of society.
So it's less about the legal arguments.
I think so, yeah.
And more about navigating those social norms.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
So it's slow and steady wins the race kind of thing.
It seems like it.
But even with this slow approach, the committee that they're creating to explore legal rights for same-sex couples, that's still a pretty big deal, right?
It is. It's definitely a step forward.
Yeah.
It's a clear sign that things are moving.
Okay.
Even if the pace is slow.
Right.
This committee has the power to recommend changes.
Like what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, for example, they could recommend granting same-sex partners rights to inheritance.
Okay.
Maybe allowing them to make medical decisions for each other.
Interesting.
Or even recognizing their relationships, for the purpose of taxes and social benefits.
So like all these things that,
things that a lot of people,
take for granted
within a marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
But that same-sex couples in India don't have, right now they don't have those.
So creating those protections.
Yeah, even if it's not marriage equality.
Right.
It's a significant step towards equality.
But still the big question is marriage equality.
Yeah, the big right.
Will Parliament take action?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely growing pressure from, LGBTQIA plus advocacy groups.
Right.
And a lot of people who support marriage equality. But there's also strong opposition from more conservative groups.
Right.
And people who hold traditional views.
So it really feels like India is at this, crossroads.
It does. It feels like a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has said, okay, Parliament, it's your turn.
Right.
What are you going to do?
And the outcome is going to affect so many people.
Millions. Yeah, millions of people.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. It really is a waiting game now.
Yeah.
With a lot at stake.
As we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about, like, the bigger picture. Like, even if Parliament doesn't act right away
Right.
on marriage equality,
Yeah.
just having this conversation,
Right.
that the Supreme Court's acknowledging that there's a need for legal protection,
Mm-hmm.
that feels like a turning point.
It does feel like progress, at least.
Yeah.
Even if it's slow.
Yeah. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
the wheels of justice are turning.
They are turning. Yeah. And the Supreme Court,
Slowly,
but
they're turning.
they're turning, and they've brought this issue to the forefront of the national dialogue.
It's like you said, that spotlight.
Yeah.
Shining a light on these inequalities.
And that can be a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
It forces people to confront their beliefs.
Uh-huh.
Have conversations that maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise.
And think about what a truly inclusive society actually means.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we can't forget about, like, those global trends we talked about.
Right. All those other countries that are moving forward.
Yeah, it's got to have some influence
I think it does.
on what happens in India.
Yeah, you see other countries, especially ones with similar cultural or religious backgrounds, embracing marriage equality, and it challenges the idea that it's somehow incompatible with those values.
Right, like it can be done.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it kind of chips away at those arguments against change.
I think so, yeah.
Shows that progress is possible.
Absolutely.
Even when it seems unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
It's been really fascinating exploring this.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, we've talked about so much. The legal complexities.
Yeah.
The history. And the fight for equality that's still ongoing.
Definitely still ongoing.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
Nope.
And we got to celebrate those victories.
Yeah, every step forward is important.
No matter how small.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
I agree.
We'll have to wait and see what the future holds for LGBTQIA plus rights in India.
Definitely.
But for now, I just want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really eye-opening to explore this with you.
Likewise.
And to all of our listeners out there.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and
keep those deep dives going.
We'll see you next time.